What is up? It's your boy Scro. Today I got the chance to talk to my homie Jay. He's got his own YouTube channel. He talks about classical music and analyzing it and all the theory behind it. Like and subscribe this video. It was pretty fun to do. Maybe I'll do more stuff like this in the future with other musicians. Also check out the track we made together. It's a fun little doinker. All right, peace.
Hey!
Today we got Jay Beard. Jay, who are you, dude?
I'm Jay Beard. I make a bunch of classical music, and I make theory and Scriabin videos on YouTube. Scriabin's the best composer ever. He's from Russia, late Romantic era, early 20th century.
Me and Jay went to high school together. We were in drumline, and we were really into like theory, all of the classical music and stuff like that together, doing marching band and concert band and jazz band together. We went to different schools and he ended up doing more classical music and I basically stopped every classical form of music and just started doing electronic and pop music. We ended up doing completely different things, and I think because of that now we have a little bit of a different viewpoint in certain genres of music. I know for me, I used to hate EDM and electronic music and pop music. I completely denounced it. I was only like a metalhead, and Jay even like played bass in my metal band for a little bit, and we were both like, screw electronic music, like it's all gonna be crazy stuff. But now I have like a completely different viewpoint and I make a living off of pop music and doing EDM. So we're trying to see today, what's freaking better, EDM or classical music? Who's better? Who's a better musician? Who's more talented? Who takes more time? What's more valid? So we just got some questions and we're gonna freaking go into it and see what happens. First question is, what is classical music to you, Jay?
Classical music is music that comes from the Western classical tradition. It's normally written into sheet music, normally performed by acoustic instruments and live players.
All right, so now let's say, what is EDM?
Yeah, Nick, what is EDM?
EDM to me, it's a huge umbrella term of so many different kinds of music. It stands for electronic dance music. But there's like ambient EDM, there's like really fast, crazy EDM, and there's like chill EDM.
Yeah, it seems like the principal difference between the two is that EDM tends to be electronic and made with synthesizers, and classical is normally played by live instruments. There is classical music that's made for electronic instruments, but roughly speaking, that's the difference.
I think at the end of the day, EDM is you're leaning on synthesizers and you're leaning on processed drum sounds. I'll say that. One time Jay visited LA and I was really trying to instill in him how valid and important EDM is as a creative art, and that it's not just like, you know, stupid some kid pressing around on some buttons or whatever. So I said we should make an EDM track together. So we did actually, and it's out. It's called Feels So Good. There's gonna be a link in the description, you can check it out. Basically Jay composed it and wrote it, and then I produced it and did all the sound design. It's kind of like a future bass, melodic trap vibe.
Yeah, check it out, it's on our YouTube channels. Which is easier or harder to make, classical or EDM?
Okay, what do you have to say about that?
Well, of course classical's harder to make because you need to learn how music theory works, you need to learn how orchestration works, you need to put in all this time making the complex music, and just as the music itself is normally more complex, you can't just copy and paste a bunch of loops. So yeah, obviously classical.
So classical musicians, I feel like, are in two sections. One is the performers and one is the composers. And they have pretty different jobs, I would say. I would argue that the performer's job is pretty technical and they're just reading whatever's on the page. As long as they play the right notes, play the right rhythms, express it properly with the right dynamic, they've done their job. So in that case, all they're doing is just playing the instrument the way that the composer meant them to do, which has a certain skill set. And then the composer is actually creating the music. They don't have to touch an instrument. They can just do this on Sibelius all day long, and then boom, they made something. But that comes with a completely different skill set.
Same for EDM.
You're right, and then I will say, obviously I'm gonna be arguing hard for EDM the whole day, but a DJ's job is not nearly as hard as a producer's job. A DJ is just pressing play, beat matching to the next song, and then pressing play. I really don't know who would have it harder in making the music, because I mentioned this to you, but if you just put two kids in a room and you said, okay, you need to compose a classical piece of music. Let's think, what does that mean? Well, we can pick whatever instrument, okay? let's say violin, you can do a solo violin thing, and you're just gonna do some simple like tonic dominant vibe. You need to understand scales, and that's kind of it, right? You just need to understand how scales work and how to write sheet music. Are you saying that sheet music is like the most important part to classical music? Because I feel like if I learned to do it on MIDI, which would be way easier, that counts, right?
Yeah, but you still have to understand how the whole system works, how the time signatures work, all that stuff.
I feel like EDM is harder because of this, okay? To get a kid to understand program works as an instrument, okay? Because that's all you're doing, you're playing your computer as an instrument. You have to figure out BPM, how to lock things together. You're gonna have all these different sounds that don't work, they need to go together. You have a huge range of sounds, which classical music has no comparison to in how many sounds they can have. In fact, I would say EDM is all about the sounds. In fact, people are making new sounds every day. Classical music, they're using the same sounds they are for everything. Maybe different timbres, maybe extended techniques. Okay, I see you maybe nodding your head wrong. I might be wrong. But I feel like that in itself, like how the choice of sound design and then understanding, using your DAW. And also, there's an element of like mixing when it comes to EDM. And with classical music, that doesn't exist. You just like make the music, and it's just like, okay, I just wrote down some notes, and then some dude plays it, and that's easy. But like to make something that actually sounds good and coherent in EDM, you need to like, you still have to understand music the same way, I feel like, classical music, but there's a whole element of like using the damn computer, and then you have to mix it. And with classical, it's just like, I don't know, you just write down the notes as long as you know a scale. Like I'm saying, you could do C major, you just put some notes, boom, you got a song.
Yeah, I guess it depends what level you're making the EDM or classical at. If you're at a high level making EDM, it is pretty complex. If you're doing the most basic EDM song, it can be pretty easy. You just go to GarageBand, you get those loops, boom, you got your song. If we're talking about the high level of writing classical music, that can also get way, way up there. I mean, we're talking like understanding atonal set theory, complex chords, and how they all interact together, motivic development, structure.
Yeah, I could argue that you do all that shit in EDM too. It's just that like we don't have like set theory and atonality. For us, what we have is like sound design, making sounds, editing, chopping, and sitting there like tweaking with something all day long, where it's really the entire process is being creative. With the classical, it's more like, here's all these like crazy rules, how to use secondary dominants, here's how to use 12-tone rows, and then you kind of just like use those rules, and it's like, I don't know, not maybe as creative, which makes it not as difficult, because it's like, am I saying anything right now?
So when you work with timbre, there's never really a wrong answer, right? Like, sure, you can spend hours making a timbre, but it's never gonna be like a big problem if it turns out one way or another. Whereas with classical, the wrong notes can stick out much more. The reason I was nodding my head earlier is there is a lot of stuff you can do with timbre in classical. Some people do like prepared piano, where you're like knocking on things. You can grab any weird object and make it a timbre. I personally don't delve into timbre that much, but you can get pretty into timbre with classical as well.
True. My final say on this is, I think because the DAW and using the laptop is so difficult to use off the bat, just getting something to sound good off the bat is so difficult, and people overlook that. They're like, oh, you're just screwing around on a computer. Well, like, yeah, I am, but that's literally part of the art. Like, with classical musicians, you're screwing around with a scale, and it's just like, here's your scale, you just do stuff with it. But for us, it's like, I have to learn this whole freaking software just to be able to get a sound. I'm not saying that that's good or bad, but if we're saying which is harder, I'm saying I think making a decent EDM song, it would take a lot longer for me to teach someone to do that than to make a decent classical song. Especially if I have like a piano student, I'm like, just write a classical piece, and they're like, okay, and they just start like screwing around on C major and like have some little left hand. And then I say, okay, all you gotta do is end on C and you'll sound good. It's like, all right, you just did it, but like, and that's it. Now, if you wanted to make EDM, you'd be like, I don't even know where anything is
You'd go into GarageBand, you'd watch the tutorial, you'd drag and drop.
And I'm saying I think that would take longer than, I mean, then it gets into like the subjectivity is like what is good and like whenever you finish something. But all right, anyways, next thing, let's freaking go. What's the next tune?
I just remember when I was a little kid, I was messing around with GarageBand. I was making EDM when I was 10.
I mean, I was making classical music when I was 10 too. Like, you sit on a piano and you make stuff, and like your stuff probably sounded like ass, and my stuff probably sounded like ass on a piano. You know, like. Yeah,
it's all about the levels of difficulty.
Yeah. All right. Anyways, what do we got next?
God damn, I was thinking about it too.
Classical music is more boring than EDM. What do you say to that?
I think at first, when you first listen to an EDM song, it is more stimulating. It's really loud. There's all these punchy things going on. So it's more interesting for like 2 seconds. But then when it just keeps on repeating, using the same samples, same loops, it starts getting a little boring. Classical music, it does take a little bit more of an attention span. Kind of like you're floating down a river, you're seeing all these different things, and you're like, where's this gonna take me next? I'd rather take that journey than the instant attraction.
So this is something I actually kind of wanted to talk to you about, and I feel like I'm gonna end up going on a different tangent. But so you have a classical song, there needs to be more attention to the development to completely understand the idea that they're getting across. With EDM, it's within like, depends on the kind of music, but there's like one thing. And that's the good thing. And if it's good, it's good. And if it's bad, you're gonna hear it over and over again. So I'm gonna go off a little tangent, but I feel like just saying like you need to get through an entire song to like understand it, there's nothing like inherently better about that, or that makes it like, oh, I had to listen to the song for 20 minutes to love it. And it's like, that takes so much time and effort and attention and is boring to have to do that. Than EDM, where it's like, boom, you know, within like 20 seconds, I get what they're doing and I love it. I'm supposed to be being entertained by music, right? And if it takes 20 seconds to get that feeling, or 20 minutes to get that feeling, like, why would I be wasting my time on something that takes so long and ends up feeling way more boring?
Yeah, and I think you're right that it's not necessarily better or worse for it to be longer or shorter. It's just two ways, yeah, it's like, it can be good to get a short fix of music, it can be good to digest a long thing of music. It's nice that classical music is versatile. You can find little short Scriabin preludes, you can find a 24-minute symphony.
I like that. All right, I'm gonna take this question and sort of do a part 2. I think the reason that classical music seems boring to most people is because it uses the same instruments and the same sound. And where EDM, that is strictly not what to do. The song is really based around the sound design. With classical music, they've been using violins, they've been using cellos, they've been using trumpets, they've been using horns, they've been using pianos. They all use the same exact sounds, and for them it's about the notes that they're using, and it's like, well, it all kind of sounds the same anyways, because it's like the same damn instrument. What are you doing differently? Even if you're using different notes, it's like, well, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess I personally don't care that much about timbre. For me, it's about like what you do with it. What I think a lot of why people might find classical a little boring is because classical does not involve beats. And EDM does involve beats. And nowadays, we're used to listening to music with beats where we can dance to it. And classical isn't giving people anything to dance to. It comes off as like really calm, like you just have to sit there and take it in. Whereas EDM, you can dance to it and it really gives you energy.
Let's freaking go, boys. So one more thing about that is classical music, to properly appreciate what the composer and the performers are trying to put in, you need to be very actively listening to it. And that takes a lot more brain power and like a lot more attention. And with most EDM music, you could kind of put it on passively and basically get the same out of it as listening to an active, because it's about the sound design. Like, obviously, if you sit down and really pay attention to anything, you're gonna get like all the little details of the little, you know, percussion-y or whatever sort of stuff. And I think that is a feature, not a defect of EDM, just to say.
It can be nice for some situations, especially like if you need to dance or something like that. You can also compare it to foods, you know, like there's some foods that appeal to just about anybody real quick, you know, if you're eating candy, you know. I always tell people that listening to Bach is like eating vegetables. It's like, at first, it's not that interesting, but the more you try it, the more you get into it, the more you realize it's good for you. I think it comes down to something you told me a while ago, that honestly, a lot of people aren't that into music. If you're not that into music, you'd like just like a quick thing. Just like I'm not that into fine dining, so maybe I'm satisfied with some quick McDonald's, gets the job done. If you are into fine dining, that's not gonna be enough. You want something more complex that took longer to make, that has more layers of flavor and all that. So I think when people get really into music and they're ready to sit down and actively listen, I think they end up getting more out of complexity of classical music.
And I'll say kind of what I've been saying is, like, you know, with EDM, it's all about sound design and texture. And with classical music, it's all about the notes that you're using. There, you know, there's genres of music where it's both, like Chuck Sutton, Phonon.
It's that hard to think of EDM people that care about their notes?
Yeah, because that's not the purpose of it. But then I could say the same thing to you, like, oh, classical musicians, they don't care about their timbres and tones, and you'll be like, well, it's out there, I just don't know.
Yeah, no, really a lot of, especially the new classical people, they experiment a lot with it. You know, John Cage doing all kinds of weird timbres.
And I almost want to argue for that, because it ends up being a more memorable experience, because you're literally listening to something you've never heard before. It's like a new sound, and it's like, oh, that sound is this idea, and that's the idea, rather than I have to listen to a whole 10-minute piece of music to understand the proper idea, rather than like the idea being like, whoa, listen to this sound. Whoa, wasn't that crazy?
Yeah, I guess it's something I never thought about, that classical doesn't have that much differences in timbre. I guess I kind of see the timbre as kind of like the icing on top, but I guess it would be ideal for music to be interesting with both timbre and the musical elements.
Which is what I try to do, swag. Not really that much, but it's because when you start getting into, like, when you do EDM with like jazz chords and things like that, it ends up being a little bit like, what are you trying to do, man? Like, just make something that sounds cool.
Yeah, no, I think I think it is a good idea to, you know, to be just as musically complex in an EDM setting. And that's kind of what I was going for when we made the Feel So Good song. I wrote it out onto sheet music so that it sounds good on the piano, and then you add the big synths, and then that just adds to it.
All right, last question, y'all. Now that we talked about all this random stuff, which one is better, EDM or classical music?
It's subjective, of course, but I like classical more. It takes you on a journey. There's all these motifs that keep reoccurring, and there's just amazing complexity. I feel like it has more replay value because of how long and complex it is. I like EDM for dancing, but overall I get more depth from classical.
I would agree that there's more depth, but I don't think that makes it better. And I think that lessens its replay value, literally because of how long it is, but also because it's like, it's gonna take me so long to get that feeling out of it, rather than putting on an EDM song and you're like, boom, this shit slaps, and you're just like, there it goes. After 30 seconds, you're already in. So I think
sometimes those build-ups last a while, though.
Yeah, not that much. You know, it's weird to say this with art, which is, you know, we're arguing for art's sake, and this is maybe not the best thing to do. But the purpose of music, I feel so uncomfortable even saying that, to manifest some sort of idea or some sort of emotion, to express an idea or express an emotion. Could we agree that the one that does that the best and the fastest and most efficiently is doing the job of music? I don't feel comfortable asking that question. That seems really shitty.
Yeah, you're basically saying that EDM gives you the effect faster, so therefore it's somehow more efficient and better.
Yes, but I would assume that you're going to argue, well, I can have a much more in-depth emotion that I'm trying to give out, as long as you're able to understand what's happening and you're able to sit through all of it and really take it in. But like, I can't properly take in a classical song while I'm like doing emails, you know what I'm saying? But I can with EDM, and I enjoy it just as much whether I'm like really listening to it or it's on like in the side. So that's like, to me, I feel like that's a bad thing about classical music, where it's like, oh my God, I got to take time out of my day to like really, you know, to properly understand this. Like, that's such a hassle. I just want to like feel good and like get that idea and feel that emotion as quickly as I can.
Yeah. I keep comparing it to food. Maybe you can eat chips or some nuts or some fruit while you're doing emails, but you couldn't eat like really sophisticated 3-course meal. I don't know why you're trying to eat while you're doing your emails. It depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for an active listening, sophisticated thing for music, classical's where to go. If you're looking for something simple to just get by real quick with some music, then you got your EDM.
So I think we came up with a consensus that EDM is better. Thank you for joining. Just kidding. There is a part of me that thinks like if I ever put out an album or like a longer EP, that would be cool to literally just like, make a piece for like a chamber ensemble where it's just like strings, because I played cello, so I was playing like chamber music all the time and just have like an intimate setting, and I was really just like flexing on all the theory and stuff that I know. But yeah, because like that is a part of me that I'm not like manifesting of myself as all like my theory and like rhythmic shit that I did with my metal band. And that's like the big difference between doing my metal stuff and my EDM stuff. With the metal stuff, all I cared about was the time signatures and the harmonies and the melodies and the chords. With this EDM stuff, it's basically all about sound design and like a fat groove. I mean, that's not really it, because I think my music that I put out is like a little bit more emotional and very like melodic, but there's definitely an element of like, I'm not gonna put a secondary dominant in any of my songs. I'm gonna be using the major scale. Maybe I'll use a harmonic minor every once in a while. Maybe some Lydian, but that's like few and far between. It's basically all gonna be diatonic and in 4/4. Yeah,
I would challenge you to make your music more complex. I think there's no reason why EDM should be limited to just the timbre. I think the reason it has been limited to mostly just the timbre is because it takes a certain expertise to work the electronic aspect, and there's often not so much overlap between people that spend a lot of time learning instruments and theory and people that learned to work the synths. So since you are one of those people, I think there's no reason why EDM couldn't be just as complex as classical.
I agree. The thing with that is that it starts deterring people. I mean, I do some cool rhythmic stuff in my music right now, like polymeters and polyrhythm, but nothing like complex time signatures. There's this guy Phonon you should check out, and he does like dubstep in 7/8 and stuff like that, and it's really sick. And you sit there and you're like, not only is he doing crazy time signatures, he's doing crazy melodies, crazy chords. Also, his sound design is insane, and he's like really encompassing almost all that I feel like music can encompass, which is sound design and notes and timing and rhythmic motifs, melodic motifs, themes, things like that. But like, you can't go to a show and like have fun with that kind of music. So much with EDM, it's about like, dancing. It's literally dance music. And it's like, you can't really dance to it. So as soon as you start doing that, it starts being like, you're not really serving the purpose of this anymore. Maybe we should all be sitting down and listening to you press play on a laptop and clapping afterwards, rather than DJing it.
Yeah, I think if you're making dance music, you might be restricted to 4/4. Kind of hard to dance in the same way in any other time signature.
I think right now I'm really enjoying just feeling the music and not thinking about it so much, and being like, oh, this sounds so nice, this feels really good. And it's like the effort and brain power that goes into being like, I gotta understand the chords and understand the functionality of this harmony. It's like, at this point, at least with EDM, it's like, that kind of puts me past what I'm trying to get into. I'm just trying to like really enjoy the emotion that's being brought. Whether the emotion is like fucking hard style, like 220 BPM, or it's like future bass, or if it's just like some trap dubby stuff, or it's just like this chill beat, like as soon as there ends up being a weird chords or weird time signatures, it's like, I gotta really turn my brain on to enjoy this, and that's like taking me out of the moment, I guess.
It always comes back to that difference we talked about, if you want something sophisticated or something simple. But I'd also say that in the Feel So Good song, I think it really added that the chords are so big. It's like 6 and 7 note chords. The last chord is the Lydian scale, like 7 notes. It wouldn't be the same effect if it was just a major chord, you know? And so I do think it's worth it to always to try and push the boundaries and do something cool harmonically.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a limit to the boundary you can push. I feel like with this track we made together, it's not so insane where it's kind of both, where someone that's passively listening to it would be like, oh, good song, but someone that's really like digging into the notes would be like, ooh, is that a Lydian chord, you know? Was
5-lits over
yeah.
3/8 notes?
I think that track really sits right on the boundary, you know, especially with those 5-lits and the Lydian chord. It's like any bit more, as soon as you start going like really non-diatonic, and it's like, this is weird to listen to.
Yeah, and I think it literally comes down to either how consonant the chord are, we could also say how spread out it is. We have major chords and that 5/30 chord, the sharp 9, flat 13, that's in the acoustic scale or Lydian dominant. That's like the next one down. It's a very close cousin to major scale. If we went just a little further, if we started doing harmonic or if we started doing octatonic, then the average listener starts giving up.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and talking about this stuff. I know it's cool, like, because we both kind of started in the same direction, and then we went off, and you went more heavy classical and I went more heavy EDM, so it's cool to kind of come back together and dish it out and see what the frick is good with all that stuff.
Yeah, and I hope we're never tied down to genres. I hope I can make some more EDM songs in the future. I hope we keep mixing up the genres.
Go check out Jay's stuff. He does a lot of like legit classical music, and he like analyzes crazy classical music. So, and also check out our song together. It was a fun little bop.
Yes.
All right. Bye, Jay.